Hi YouTube, welcome back to Wtf Rc Cars. So it's that time again to update your Noble Pro, and I'm going to cover a few things in this one, and I strongly advise you all to actually use the updater to update your Noble Pro and not Flysky Assistant. Flysky Assistant is, although I like the functionality, it needs some work, and Flysky are aware of this, they are working on it. Backing up your model memories and everything's fine, because if that process fails you can just restart again. If however it fails and you're writing the software, if it fails at the part where it erases the software and it's not written anything back to it, including the bootloader, you will brick your controller, and at the moment there'd be no way to get it back. I don't know if Flysky will release a recovery firmware like they did for the G7P, so I strongly suggest only use Assistant for backing up and restoring your model memories. Other thing, make sure you use a good quality short USB cable. The one that comes with it works absolutely fine. You will need a data cable, but don't use these great long meter or 2 meter cables. Although they're fine for like plugging your phone in and charging it and maybe copying pictures over, when you're copying data over and it's just dragging a picture to a PC or a video to a PC, it will do data correction and it will slow down the transfer. When you're actually writing directly to a firmware chip, these long cables, they get interference, the integrity of the data's not there. It also can be a position where the cable's that long that the response that the radio gives back to the PC times out. That can break the update process. So use a decent quality, if you haven't got the one that came with it, use a decent quality short USB cable for actually updating firmware on these. But let's take you up to PC. I'll show you how to decide which firmware you need for yours, because you've got either the EN version, which is the US version, or the EU version, which is for Europe and UK. You do need to download the updater for the correct version. And as always, you've got FCC firmware. Now, if you use that, you get a higher transmission power. It's not legal to use it in UK or Europe, but you can put it on. Up to you if you want to break law. Or the standard version, which gives you slightly less transmission power but is legal in Europe and UK, and you do get longer battery life. Now, as a rule, I tend to use the standard one on mine anyway, because I've never had a range issue, and usually if you're getting range issues it's because something in the RC is causing interference or something in your local area is causing interference and dropping the range. But let's take you up to PC and I'll show you how to get your Noble Pro fully updated.
Right, so the first thing we're going to want to do on this journey of updating your Noble Pro, you're going to want to go to Flysky's website, click on Flagships and then Noble Pro. We're going to down to bottom, then you want to go on Downloads and Upgrades. Once we're on here, you can see you've got the user manual, you can see the release date of the firmware and the various different versions. So in here you'll have the FCC firmware for the EU version, FCC firmware for the EN version. Now if you look on your Flysky transmitter, you need to go into your system menu, so the gear, then system, scroll all the way to the bottom, click about, and you'll be able to see, on mine you can see Noble Pro EU. If you're on the American version it'll say Noble Pro EN, so you know which version you want. So next you can choose whether you want the FCC firmware or the standard firmware. So generally I run the standard one, but I've been testing a few different firmwares on these, so I want EU standard. So we're going to download that, and this is the actual updater file for the software. So what I find, just to make your life easier, if you create a desktop, so create a folder on your desktop, Let's get it right. So I'll just call this V3. So then you go into it and you save your firmware to that location. So that's the actual updater. Then you want to download Flysky Assistant V3. So if you click download, download that to the same location and then just run the file. I've got videos already showing you how to set up Assistant. So once you've got Assistant installed and you've got your firmware downloaded, we can then go into your folder and you should see you've got the firmware version that you want. So you then want to open Assistant, and don't worry if this takes an age to log in, it's just how Assistant is at the moment. So once you've got your controller plugged in, you just need to power it up. Click on the device, then we're going to want to go to export. We're going to want to load as model memories, and you'll hear that the controller makes a noise and then it'll load the memories. You select all, then export. Then you want to go to your same folder. So we'll go to his desktop and then Noble Pro V3. And then what you can do on here, what I find useful, is you just put today's date. So we'll go 07 and then it's the 4th and then 23. Click save, and this is backing all your model memories up to your actual PC. So the only thing you'll have to do is rebind each car to its relative model memory. Also worth updating the firmware on your receivers. Even if they bind the newer firmware or refreshing the firmware on it to match your actual firmware on your radio is always best practice, and it literally takes seconds to do. And you don't need the PC to do it, although if you have got your receivers to hand, there is a way that you can have your receiver connected to your controller and update it through Assistant. So I'll have to do a video on that at a later date. So you get file exported successfully, and then it'll go back to this screen, and then if you look in your folder, that's the file you've got, so we know that all his memories are backed up safely. So you do need to close Assistant V3 at this point. So we can close that down, and don't open the updater until you've done this next bit. So for this, we're going to go back over to his controller. You're going to click on the gear, and this is still the same in the older firmware. And then you're going to scroll down to the bottom and you're going to find firmware update. You're going to click that and click yes. You'll see your controller go off. It'll then come back on. So then we should be able to open as firmware updater. That'll come onto this screen and it'll show ready for update. Then you click update and your update process will start. And then you should see the controller restart once it's finished. And as you see, I want to video this entire process because it does pause at certain points. So don't be alarmed if it looks like it's not doing anything for a few seconds or so. And I kind of like doing videos like this and not cutting this bit out, because if you do unplug the controller and it's erased the current firmware, although your screen's still on, the actual firmware chip can be blank. If you do unplug it at that point, the controller has no software. So you see it's changed to verify flashing, so it's now checking what firmware it's written. Then you should see your controller restart, and then you're on your new firmware. So once we're at this point, you can close this, And then we're gonna, you should have your assistant update sort of software. So you then want to start that. I'll move that back to where it belongs. But basically, it'll sit on this connecting to server for a few minutes or so. So I'll cut this bit out and we'll continue when it's actually connected to server. Right, so you'll hear your controller make a noise when Assistant V3 starts. So basically we need to go back into his device settings. Let's see if it'll let me move that across a bit. So now we want to import. You can see your stats of your controller and firmware. And once we're on this screen, we want to go back to his desktop. We want to go to our Noble V3 folder that we created. Select your firmware, and you know which one your backup is because you put a date on it. Click open. This will then read the file, and basically it's looking at all your model memories. So you've got them all listed. You click import, and I would suggest not ticking all. Just tick the ones that have actually got models written to them. So they're the ones you want to write. They're all blank on mine. So you click add, it moves them all across to here. And if you want to reorder these, now's a good time to do it because you can click on it and press up and down and it'll shift them all around for you. So you can move them all around, change what order you want. Once you've done that, press OK. You'll see your screen change on your actual transmitter itself. And then you may get the same issue as what we've just got now, and Assistant V3 crashes out completely, which is why I say do not use Assistant V3 to update the firmware. So we need to get this to connect to server again, but because it's only writing model memories, you can close your controller down, you can start it back up. And if we have a look what it's actually done, if we go into our model and then model select, you can see it's writ some of them. So we've only got down to 15, which I think is right on mine. So on mine it managed to write them all before it crashed. If it didn't manage to write all yours, you can just start Assistant back up again, go back in, select the ones it didn't write, and it'll copy them across for it, or you can select them all again and try the process again. For mine it managed to write them before it crashed. I've also had it where it's only managed to write 2 or 3 and then it's crashed. It did used to work fine and it's doing exactly the same with the MB4, so I think there's just a problem with the Assistant at the moment. But basically that is it. You should now have a fully functioning controller, and all you need to do is bind your receivers back. But as I say, I would update each receiver. If you're going in and you're pressing bind button or the bind plug, you may as well update the firmware on them at the same time, but I'll do separate videos on all the receivers for that one. Most of them I've already covered, and the update process is exactly the same with the MB4 and Pro as it always has been. So let's wrap this one up.
So there you have it. You should have the new update on your controller, and hopefully that all went smooth for you. I'll try and do it as slow as possible and show you the exact steps, and I try not to cut the part where it's updating it, because as you see, sometimes it'll pause at a certain point and people sort of panic and pull lead and think it's crashed, and if you do that, you've got a high chance of bricking your controller, just same as if you're updating firmware on anything from a PC. But there you go, fully updated, fully working, and hope you enjoy the new features. Thanks for watching Wtf Rc Cars. If you like this kind of content, don't forget to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, share to friends and family. I'll catch you guys again in the next one.